So I've just done a 360, hard as glass. Hey guys, so the video today is, can we turn that into that? Well, we can. So how do we turn that into that? This is a video I'm aiming it at people who are new to knife making and want to learn about knife making, so there's quite a bit of talking in it. I'll put some timestamps in the video below because I'm going to do some forging. I'm going to explain a little bit about normalising steel and heat treating steel. So I'll put timestamps in the description box below, so if you're not really interested in forging, you'd like to learn a bit more about normalising and heat treating, you can go to the relevant points. Yes, so right, I've chosen a file because they're very readily available. Generally, if you find an old file, it's going to be better than a more modern file, possibly, depending on the make. There are ways to test if the file is any good, because a lot of files are case hardened and the steel underneath isn't good enough really for knife making. But you can do a test on a file to see if it's any good and check the grain of the steel, and we're going to do that now, and I'll show you how we do it.
So I'm just testing it with the magnet here. It wants to be not quite sticking, which is just over non-magnetic. Good temperature. If you get it too hot, if you quench it too hot, the grain will be large, it'll be brittle anyway. Just breaks really nice, and it's a bad picture, but the grain size on this was really small. So I'm starting on the front. You've got to put the point onto the knife here, because if you thin down the steel, which I've got to do, as you try and forge your tip in, the steel will start bending over on itself and curling over. So always try when your stock's still thick to forge your tip in. And then it's simply a matter of thinning down the steel. This knife will have a distal taper from the handle, front of the handle to the tip. So first of all I get the tip worked in, and then I start thinning it out, as you can see here. I do plan to forge the bevels into this from the spine down to the edge as well, and it just means there's going to be less grinding to do. Constantly hammering the bevels in and then correcting the width, and I always try and work on the edge of the anvil so that you don't actually hit the face of the anvil with your hammer. I realise at this point that I'm standing in front of the camera, so I shift the actual hammering onto the sides of the anvil, so I'm not standing in my own way like there. So with the hammer off the actual anvil, you can't hit your anvil with the off side of the hammer. You put some big dings in it. And here, I just got sick of hammering, and because I've got a press, I just drew the handle end out. It was too thick, I needed to thin it down. It's still a bit too thick here. I'm not going to bother doing much work on it because I'm just going to grind it. Really, that's all the forging was. You work on kind of an 1 or 2 inch section at a time, drawing your bevels in and working on your thickness. Okay, with the forging done, I'm going to just stress relieve the blade a little bit here. I'm just heating it back up, letting it soak for a couple of minutes, and then I'm going to take it out of the forge and just leave it in the air still to cool. I'll do it 2 more times after that at descending temperatures, and the grain is very large after you've been forging, and it's brittle, and it's not in a good state, and the steel will also air harden, so you won't be able to drill it. It will be tough to work. You won't be able to cut it. So this last cycle here is, I've turned the forge off, the forge is hot inside, and I'm just letting it change colour. to like an orange, and then this should mean that when this cools in the air, we'll be able to work on the knife, we'll be able to drill it. So after it's cooled here, I took it to the bandsaw and cut the rebar off, and it cut really nice. So it is kind of semi-annealed, so I can work it. It's going to be easier to grind. I've got an old belt on here, an old worn 40 grit, and really all I'm going to do is just remove this forging scale. There is a bit of a twist in the handle as well, but the handle's thicker than it needs to be, and when I've ground that out, I can actually grind that twist out. I won't need to try and even forge it straight. So with this 41 out old 40 grit belt, I'm going to just remove some of this forging scale off here and just try and straighten the knife up, flatten the sides out really, because I just want a nice flat edge along the spine of the knife, and then I can work on, I've got something to work off then really. The handle has got a slight lift in it there, as you can see, because it's a chef knife. You need a little bit of clearance underneath for when you're cutting. So like I say, it's just about removing a bit of forging scale now and trying to flatten everything out. The handle is still a bit too long at this point as well. Most of that turn on the handle will come off when I grind the handle to length anyway. So I'm running it down the plating because it's dead flat, and then where I see the grind marks, I take it across the knife and remove them, and I keep doing that, going backwards and forwards down the plate and then across the knife, just removing the grind marks. Now here I've changed to a new belt. This is a 36 grit, a new belt, and I'm now flattening out, straightening out the knife along the spine. I just need it dead straight for the next steps now, because I need to mark a line down the center of the spine and down the edge. And you can see on one side of the knife that I've actually done more forging on one side. Okay, so it is something you've got to be careful of when you're forging, that you hammer on each side of the knife equally, or you end up with, you know, one side pushed down more than the other side. Luckily this isn't too bad, and I can correct it with grinding. Yes, we're at 3.3 millimeters just in front of the handle, 3.10 at the front end. So what I'm going to do is mark the center of the spine now all the way down, because I want to put a taper into the knife towards the tip. I'm not going to take too much more off this, but I do need to grind in that bevel just to get it towards that center line. So on the spine I'm pretty good. It just wanders off a little bit at the front. You can see there. Not worried about that. I can get that on grinding. But yeah, quite pleased with that. Right. So I've just taken it down on the grinder. You can see I've got the spine nice and straight now off the center line. You can see it's still off a little bit on the center. If you can see that. I could have taken that, I could have straightened that out, but then I would have left the front too thin for heat treating and would have had a buckle there definitely. So that can be, I'll do that when on the final grind. So I've just done a 360 and then a 60 grit. And with that grinding, basic grinding done, it's nowhere near ground to thickness, but it's just ground ready for heat treat, and we're going to put some anti-scale on now. APT 641, keep it in a jar with water, put a bit of water with it to make it a bit more fluid and paintable. It's easier in the jar, you can just shake it up. You leave it in the pot, you just endlessly seem to be stirring the damn stuff up, you know, trying to get the lumps out of it. But keeping it in a jar and giving a shake just leaves you with a lovely consistency. It's like cream.
It goes on very nice.
We're almost ready for heat treating, but before I do that, I do have to refine the grain in the steel, because as it is now, the grain is very large and it's not good to go and just heat treat the knife like this. You won't get the best out of the steel. So what I've got to do is refine the grain. I've got to reduce the size. To do that, it's called normalising. And what we do is we heat the knife up to a specific temperature. In this case, it's way above non-magnetic, 850 to 900 degrees centigrade. We heat it up to that, we hold it for a couple of minutes, and then we just let it cool in the air. And I do this 3 times, so the first will be, say, 900, the second will be 800, the third will be 700. Sometimes I'll go and do it, 650 or something like that, but I'm just going to do 3 cycles on this, and it's been in there now. It's just about ready to pull out and air cool. So this is just showing the readout on the thermocouple in the heat treat oven. And this is a gas oven. I've got 2. I've got an electric and a gas. It's very, very accurate, this gas oven. It's a great little oven. It only takes about 5 minutes to get up to temperature, and it's very, very controllable. You can't really walk away and leave it. You do have to monitor it, and the temperature is controlled by that valve there, which is very, very micro adjustable, so I can set any given temperature. If you're going to go forward into making knives, I strongly recommend that you build a dedicated heat treating oven, because only then can you really get the best out of the steel and heat treat a steel that's going to have great edge holding abilities. And you can, with temperature, the world's your oyster. You can heat treat a steel for a given specific task, like a chef knife wants to be hard, or something else wants to be a little bit softer but tougher, and the world is your oyster. Just working off a magnet coming out of a forge isn't the best, because to get the best out of a heat treat on any steel, it does need to soak. You need time for the carbon to move through in the iron molecules, and for everything to get distributed, for the grains in the steel to sort of move and mesh together, ready for the final quench. So this is the first thermal cycle. You can see the blade is screaming hot. I'm just checking it for straightness, and it is dead straight. So I'm going to leave it hang there till it gets down to about 200 centigrade, then put it back in for its next normalising cycle.
So I'll start to heat the quench oil up now. I use one of these. These are kind of what you get in food fryers. Just fits perfectly in my quench tank. And I'll get the temperature up around 35-40 centigrade. It's a much better method than shoving a hot piece of steel into the quenchant, because doing that actually really reduces the life of the quenchant by doing that. Okay guys, everything's set up. The oil's perfect temperature. The forge is, the heat treating oven's perfect temperature. We're just coming up to 10 minutes now, which is enough. If you know what steel you're using, be it 0110, F5, 1085, D2, whatever, if you know your steel, then always refer to the spec sheets for that steel for heat treating. I kind of always follow them. Sometimes I tweak them a little depending on the knife I'm making. But this Nicholson file, I really don't know what steel it is, and some people will swear that it's 10XXX steel. You really don't know. From the sparks it was given off when I was grinding, I would say it's about 0.7 carbon, 0.8 carbon. That's what I'm guessing. So that's why I've gone a little bit higher on the temperature. And we'll find out in a second. But I know that temperature on that steel will give me a good hard edge. As you saw when we, going right back to the beginning, when we did the quench and break test, and you saw the grain, which was a lovely grey, fine grain. Quenched it non-magnetic, so we're just above that, which should give me a great edge. We're going in now. Let's get it done.
And what I'm going to do here is just put the edge, the cutting edge, in the oil first, and it's called a differential heat treat, so the edge is going to be much harder than the back of the knife that didn't initially go in the oil. And what it will do, it will give you a much harder edge and a softer spine, because that's what I want from this knife, because it's a chef knife. I want a really hard.
Never move the knife from side to side, always up and down. You'll cause a bend if you start slashing it around sideways. You can cause a bend. So you can move it forwards, backwards, up and down. I always check the side of the blade with my finger, and when I can touch that, I know that the quench is done, or that it's been in the quench long enough, should I say. Right, I'll just go and get my Rockwell files.
I can't test this on my Rockwell machine because I've ground the bevels in, and you can't put a diamond tester on a sloping face, because you won't get an accurate reading usually, but you also run the risk of actually breaking the diamond in the machine.
So there will be a bit of decarb on the surface of this steel, bit of decarburization. The anti-scale does protect that to a degree actually. It stops oxygen hitting the surface and burning up the carbon. I'll just remove that, then I can just get a kind of a more accurate reading. Start with 65. Absolutely nothing. No, hard as glass. Whereas we're just scratching the spine, can you see that? We're marking up the spine there. We're doing nothing to that edge. Let's try and determine what the spine is. There's 50. Yeah, 50, 55 on the spine, and we're 65 or above on the edge. So the heat treating has been successful. Right, I need to temper this now, because that edge could crack at any point now. It is so hard. The stresses in that steel between that softer back and the harder edge, a lot of stress and tension in there now. And all I'm going to do is I'm just going to knock the temper back a little bit, because I want the edge 62, 63 Rockwell anyway. So I'm going to take it 120, 30 degrees for an hour, 2 hours. I've chosen a nice piece of olive wood, just polished it, and that's kind of the best I can pull out of it. I just got to clear the bench. It looks like a crime scene. Epoxy's mixed, just drying in the sun, just warming up in the sunshine.
So part 2 will be along very soon, and if there's anything you would like me to answer, any questions you've got, please leave a comment down below. Also, if you've got any videos you would like me to do regarding knife making, any sorts of blades you would like to see me make, also leave a comment down below, guys. Thank you.